Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Issachar Foundation Jamaica's public lecture series. My name is Philippa Davies, a member of the Issachar Foundation Jamaica and the moderator for this evening's lecture. Welcome wherever you are located in Jamaica, the wider Caribbean, other parts of the world, and welcome to this evening's lecture entitled, "It's Been Made to Look Harder Than It Is, Combating State Corruption 101. If this is your first Issachar Foundation Jamaica lecture, a warm welcome to you. And we hope that we will see you in future lectures. And just to let you know that the lecture series provides a discussion forum to explore public policy issues and social trends within the context of the Judeo-Christian worldview, which the foundation unabashedly affirms as providing the most sound foundation for nation building and human flourishing for everyone. And we take our inspiration from the scripture verse in 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 32, which says, "The men of Issachar understood times and knew what Israel should do." And now I'm going to invite the chairman of the Issachar Foundation Jamaica, Dr. Wayne West, to open our time together in prayer. Dr. West?
Yes, let us pray. Father, we thank you as always for the opportunity to serve you in any capacity. We know it is a privilege. It is an absolute privilege because we are not worthy to be given such an honor to serve in the kingdom of God. But we pray, God, that whatever we do it in such a way that it would be pleasing to you. And so we pray that this evening's lecture would be what you want us to do, and that it would achieve the purpose that you want it to achieve. We know how important it is for the state to be free of corruption, how much that affects every aspect of the lives of the citizens in terms of even business creation, wealth creation, as well as security. So we pray, God, that we will not only hear today, but we will do all for your honor and all for your glory. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.
To let you know, or to remind you, that the Issachar Foundation Jamaica has been hosting public lectures since August 2010. And before COVID-19, we met face-to-face. But since June 2020, we've migrated online. And this is our 11th virtual lecture. Some of the previous topics over the years have been moral inputs, mortal outcomes, bridging the gap between values and crime, uncovering the hidden facts about NIDS, the National ID System, life with COVID, health, liberty, and law. Too is better than too many is leaving Jamaica with too few, the deadly truth behind population control programs. Common sense for the Commonwealth, resisting British totalitarianism, and George Soros, globalism, and the threat to human rights. And to catch some of these lectures, I invite you to visit the Issachar Foundation Jamaica YouTube channel, where you can view and listen to some of our previous presentations. And if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, if you're not already there, and receive notification of future lectures, please inbox me, Philippa Davies, with your email address. Now, just some housekeeping matters. Of course, you know to keep your microphone on mute for the duration of the presentation, but we will have an opportunity for questions and answers after. You can put your written questions in the chat and I will acknowledge them. And then we will have a rich and engaging discussion. Now I'm going to introduce our guest presenter for this evening, Ms. Jeanette Calder. She is founder and executive director of the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal Limited 2018, JAMP, which tracks, measures, and exposes accountability issues in government. She pioneered the design and the development of the online portal JAMP that seeks to place in the hands of citizens, media, academia, and government itself an accountability tool to strengthen public oversight mechanisms and improve stewardship over public resources and assets. She's a graduate of the Caribbean School of Architecture with a bachelor's in architectural studies and a graduate of the Institute for Housing and Urban Development, Erasmus University, the Netherlands, with a master's in urban management and development. Now, Jeanette is fully engaged in civil society advocacy for better public governance, and her years of work in the Jamaican public sector, as well as her service on a number of government boards and committees, exposed her to the challenges that encumber effective public management. And it's against that background that Jeanette has emerged and remains tirelessly hopeful about improved public governance and accountability in Jamaica, even as she vocalizes citizens' concerns. And she's now going to share with us on It's Been Made to Look Harder Than It Is, Combating State Corruption 101. Please let us welcome Jeanette. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philippa. Cheryl, there are lots of familiar names that I'm seeing. I wish I were seeing faces, but it's really very good to be with you. For a number of reasons, but particularly so because I identify as a believer. I am approaching this entire process recognizing that I am not walking alone. Aside from human support, I was actually in advocacy for about 7 years when I was running out of steam, having come back home to work in government, and I was looking forward to it because I am a public sector agent at heart, and I decided to assist with some expertise that I had as civil society group at the time. Most of you might recall the name, the Jamaica Civil Society Coalition. And in assisting them, I was really impressed with the response of the government at the time, and I had realized that if citizens are really serious and we take an evidence-based approach to advocacy, what I was learning through this particular group is that government listens. And many times over that 7 years, I saw government actually respond. A lot of our victories were not public ones because a lot of the discussions took place in meetings long before the issues became public. But I recognized something really important during that time, which is that though sometimes government, public officials and parliamentarians make some decisions that seem really irresponsible, I actually discovered that they can be pretty responsive. So after 7 years, however, advocacy is not exactly where you go to get a lot of money. I said to the Lord, look, if we can come up with something that's more effective and something that can actually allow me to live reasonably well, then we have a deal. And I gave the Lord about a month. But I sat down and I thought about all that I had learned the 7 years in advocacy. And what came out of it, as Philippa said, is the Jamaica Accountability Meter portal. What I want to do this afternoon is to provide you with the benefit of a lot of what I have learned along the way. And a lot of what I've learned along the way is what it is that actually made Philippa describe me as, I call it, indefatigably hopeful about governance in Jamaica. I am not doing this because of trying to find a way to earn. This is not what you do for that. And I'm not doing this because it's just a hobby or I have a particular interest in advocacy. I have committed to this and I have garnered the support from the European Union and the local private sector organization of Jamaica, which is JAM's implementing partner, because what I'm about to share with you tonight is doable. And that is my hope, that at the end of what's going to be a relatively brief presentation, it's really just an introduction. And I'm hoping that the Issachar Foundation will have me back for a deeper dive. There is so much and no more I can do in the one presentation. Generally, what I like to do is to present some of the background and provide the reasons for my hope. Citizens and nobody will expend their time and their investment in something they don't believe is going to reap results. So I pay some attention to that, but I particularly usually like to end by sharing the digital tools that JAMP has created, not just for citizens, but actually also for government, partnering with them, for the state agencies, for the media, and for students. Time is not going to allow me, so I'm going to hope that after the presentation that I can invite you on your own time to take a look at our website and the tools that we have. And I'll share a little bit about the new ones that we will be coming out with long before the year is out. So on that note, I want to thank you for having me, Dr. West, and the rest of the team, particularly Shirley, who is not here at the moment. I think she has a commitment today. But Shirley has really been the one to reach out and to plan and to organize, and I'm deeply appreciative of the the time that you're going to give me. So we're 22 strong at this point in time, and that's more than enough to shake up an entire island and to create change. So I'm gonna switch over and ask you, as usual, you can actually see my screen. So I want to start where I have been starting in my presentation since the year began. And that is when the curtain literally opened on what we call independence. And yes, I know there's a political and a civil society debate going on, but for this evening, we're gonna call it independence. On the 11th of April, 1963, I would say accountability pivoted in Jamaica because we were now fully in charge of making decisions and to a certain extent had achieved self-determination up to a point. This is actually a picture I found of our first post-independence cabinet. At the time, the Jamaica Labour Party was the administration in charge, and I'm sure some of you recognize a lot of those faces. I recognize maybe about 1/3. But more importantly, is this amazing Gleaner archive front page that I came across. It says here that there was a record spending, whoopsie daisy, of £56.5 million presented in the House, our first post-independence budget. And what was special about it is what I could read, which you can't, so I will pull that out for you. This is a photo of our finance minister at the time, Donald Sangster. We were learning that despite the fact that Britain had been in charge for a long time, we were going to be spending more money than ever before in a financial year. That alone caught my attention. We were going to raise enough to pay for the country's loan requirements for the first time in years. That also caught my attention. The idea that we made a surplus was one, but most importantly was the fact that this increase in revenue that the government was expecting was borne out by the confidence that people had in a new nation, in a new idea that we could make our own decisions, and they were excited about it and they were putting their money where their mouth was. And I traveled a little bit back in time, though this was really before my time, trying to picture what it was like for Jamaicans that first year. Now, beyond that kind of a reverie, I was also drawn to not just the idea of an action budget, but you'll notice two more headlines there. One says the private sector was urged to support the government drive, and they were. But very interestingly was that headline. It says a 3-man commission was named to probe the KSAC. And immediately what that set up in my mind is the tension that we have been experiencing, not since then, even before then, but certainly at the dawn of independence, we had our then Prime Minister Bustamante having to set up a probe to look into what they called at that time graft, which we call corruption. Now that's the tension that has been set up from them, a country that's yearning to benefit and extract all the value that it can from the taxes of its people, while at the same time, persons who have been put in a position of trust, which is really what it is, have an opportunity and abuse their public power and public resources and their own public stewardship for personal and private gain. Now, for those of you who might have been in previous presentations, this is a slide I never, ever, ever leave out for two reasons. One, it can present itself as a depressing slide, because literally, as the topic at the top says, it's my Auditor General scrapbook, and I had pulled this together from way back in 2014 into 2016, trying to get a handle and an idea of how long has this been going on, where are we coming from, and the extent to which we might have made progress. Well, these headlines, when I'm actually in workshops with young people and I have the time, I would usually ask them to, can you look at the headlines and guess for me, when do you think the Gleaner at the time would have written these articles? And invariably, the guesses are always within the last 5 years. But as you can see on the screen, we're coming all the way from 1958 all the way down to 2016, which at the time was when I had created this slide. That tells me that this problem is a serious one. And number two, it tells me that this problem cuts across administrations. Now, it's really important to say that because there's a question I get all the time, which might sound offensive, but I think it's a legitimate one in light of our political culture and our history, and that is, what is JAMP's agenda? Well, whenever you're an advocate under a particular administration, you automatically become characterized as a supporter of the other and being anti the present government. I think the fact that I began advocacy in 2012 should say enough, and was actually the co-executive director for the Jamaica Civil Society Coalition. But in addition to that, this slide is one that I share to really demonstrate to citizens that it really does cut across administrations. And I am actually convinced that if I were to look a little further beyond 1958, for those of us who remember our history, we were actually self-governing in 1957, meaning that we had a premier, wasn't a prime minister. We had a cabinet that had ministerial portfolios and responsibility. And I believe at that time, it was just the JDF or the military and the police, law enforcement that Britain had maintained control of. So we were making decisions prior. But if we look a little further back, I am certain that the then Auditor General, because this is a creature, not just of our Constitution, but from the British Commonwealth, that if we look even further back, we will see that these stories are still dating even under the British. So for me, it is a human nature problem, which really says, if you give people opportunity, whether or not it is need or greed, if you give them opportunity, if there are not internal controls and if there's not oversight, this is what is going to happen. So that's the first thing. This is not a political issue. It's a human nature issue. And the question as we go along is the extent to which we can understand as citizens the guardrails that have been set up and how we can partner with government when human nature goes counter to what we would want them to do. Now, coming away from the 1958, my eyes really settled on this 1984 one, and I'm glad I followed my instincts because I took a look at the newspaper in the Gleaner archives. By the way, it's an amazing resource. I have been subscribing to the Gleaner archives since 2008 simply because I love our history. And for those of us who don't know, this actually goes back to 1834. That was slavery, I think, was abolished, or the announcement of it was that how far the Gleaner is going and how far you can read back every single page of the Gleaner, documenting quite a bit of our history. So I took a look at this 1984 Auditor General dissatisfied with the national accounts, and I found the most fascinating letter to the editor. And you probably won't be able to read it, but this was dated February 15. So I pulled out the piece that caught my eye. It says, "Can we hope that immediate attention will be given to the Auditor General's report and his recommendations put in train?" And this Jamaican from Kingston 6 identified himself as the Scrutator. And I love that name. I'm probably going to use it for my social media handle after this, because this is somebody who was clearly paying attention to something like this report and was concerned that there was not enough attention being given and recommendations that the Auditor General made were not being paid attention. Now, this is 1984. And for those of you who are familiar with JAMP, you would have already recognized why this would jump out at me. This is the core reason that JAMP exists. It's predominantly to pay attention. Those of you who follow us on social media would learn that our favorite hashtag is Mind Your Business Jamaica. And so that's what we're doing. We have recognized that it's not unique to Jamaica. It blew me away when I discovered this, so it might surprise you. When you think about the humongous amount of monies that we lose due to waste, mismanagement, and corruption, but there is no mechanism in government to follow up on these recommendations that have been given to a permanent secretary or a CEO, and to check and see if they're actually remedying it according to what the Auditor General has said or according to what our parliamentarians have said. I find that truly amazing. So recognizing that, JAMP came into being just to partner with government to provide that very same mechanism, and I'll share with you in a little while how it is that citizens could actually do that. Now, I shared with you from 1958 coming along. This was 2017, and just about around the time when I was getting a little frustrated with advocacy, and I took a look at the headlines for 1 year. And this is just a glimpse of them, not them in its entirety. But if you take a look again at those headlines, you can see again pretty much the same. All that is happening is a name change of institution, but the basic core issues remain. So in 2018, the JAMP was born precisely echoing the mandate of what the Auditor General then indicated was their mission. And what was that? To increase the quantity, the quality and the coverage, yes, of public goods and services as the quality of our lives, right? But how are we going to do it? Because all NGOs pretty much have that same goal, but we wanted to focus on waste, mismanagement, fraud, and how public officials were stewarding our resources. We have, you wonder how we're going to do it? Well, we have 3 basic objectives. And I think it's important for citizens to know how we're working, because it's easier for you to partner with us if you know what is our frame. And it starts with just strengthening the existing mechanisms in government. Let's not do anything new, and I'll tell you why in a little bit why we don't need to. But let us strengthen what exists the best we can in the parliament, but as well also in the government. If it's not on those 2 tracks, it's not going to succeed. And the second one is educating the public. The only reason I have this level of confidence, and I really do, is because I got a chance to understand how the mechanics of accountability works in Jamaica. And just about like anything, if you don't understand how it works, you're a little intimidated by it. But sometimes when you find out how something works, you say to yourself, my God, that's all it was. And that's precisely how this situation seems to me. So JAMP is committed to continue to learn. And as we learn by doing. Philippa told you I'm really an architect by training. So you would be surprised that I would be doing this, but it can be understood. And as we understand more through our research, we simply pivot, we explain it to the public. And then the third and the last, which might be the hardest of them all, is actually to stimulate citizens to engage. I say this almost in every presentation that, and all of you are accustomed to it. We were all told this: when you point at somebody, there are 3 fingers pointing back at you. But this adage, this proverb, this saying really came to life for me, because the more I looked at the situation, is the more convinced I become that we've been looking at the politician for too long. And we've been blaming the politician for too long. There are 25 of us in the room now, and 25 of us are employers. We have employed 84 Jamaicans, and we do that just about every 4 or 5 years. These positions become vacant based on the Constitution immediately, and we have candidates who are applying for a job. An election is a job recruitment process. You and I are employers. Now, that said, and boy, let that sink in, because it's easy to say, but when you really process it, you know, it says a lot. And the first thing it says to me, and the first thing it says when I say it to young people, which is amazing, they said to me, so them have job description, because the minute they connect the fact that, hold on a minute, I am an employer, immediately, and not just a voter, but immediately there's a mindset shift, and I see it happen all the time. And they begin to ask me the certain things that an employer would ask for, like, where's the job description? Because immediately they understand then, wait a second, I have something to do if I'm an employer. There is no employer who puts a business together, puts the equipment in place, recruits for the employees, and then leaves them for 4 years. And if any employer, anybody who invests and start a business were to do that, when you come back in 5 years, nobody tell nobody said the business popped down, because nobody would be empathetic. But for some strange reason, and I think I know the reason nonetheless, but for some reason, we have decided, the owners and the stewards, the real stewards of this island and all that God has blessed us with, for some strange reason, we have been puzzled about why the democracy doesn't work. We've been puzzled about why we're losing money. When in truth and in fact, guys, if we are not overseeing and minding our business, that can only be the reasonable end product, right? But what it is that JAMP realizes citizens need, and we're trying our best to provide, is knowledge, understanding, and the tools. Every job that you have, a mechanic needs to change a tire. Yes, the 5 mechanics can lift up the car on their own. One man can change the tire. It would take longer. They would be exhausted. They couldn't do no more work for the day. But if they had a tool, and the basic idea of a tool is something that you can leverage to make a job easier. If they had a jack, they could do it in 15 minutes flat and move on to another. So the idea behind JAMP is that we want to provide the tools, the accountability tools, citizen-centric, citizens-driven tools that can make it easier. Because if you don't know how, it can look really intimidating to hold government to account. So why do we need a JAMP? It's a digital tool. Most people are accessing us by their cell phones. It's because I am of the view looking at this for a number of years that all the ingredients for change are here. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. Are they enough to get that jack up? Absolutely yes. I would like to be able to come back and break down every 8 of them in great detail, because part of my job as the executive director is to convince you of that. And if I don't, then I don't have the support that I need. But the legislation is in place, folks. And the one I want to focus on is the access to information legislation. We can't do what we do without this. I have shared that it is the most phenomenal gift that a government really can give citizens who are interested in oversight, who are interested in their country, because this is a legislation that says, and not just to the Jamaican, it's a legislation that gives this right to anybody who wants to ask government a question. Guys, just think about it for the week. You're reading the newspaper, you see something disturbing, you'd love to know some more about this. And you don't have to stop there. You can actually send in a letter, preferably, but by law, a phone call will do, and ask for that information, any documentation to assist you. And let me just give you a quick example, because I was talking about this on air about a week ago, and I picked up the newspaper, and on the front page was a story about a morass in the grill that was catching a fire sporadically over time. And the media had informed Jamaica that, look, guys, the hoteliers are distressed, the travelers are distressed. But guess what? The government was given, I think, I don't remember the number now, but a couple million US dollars, the number evades me, to fix the problem through NEPA. Now, immediately you see that if you're one of the hoteliers, if you're interested in the environment, if you're the Jamaica Environment Trust, what do? Don't sit down and complain about it. Draw for that ATI legislation. What does it do? Write to the government immediately. It has been given to the government since 2018. This is 2022. The problem is still recurring. Write and ask for the proposal. Write and ask, what did the government commit to do to the World Bank that allowed them to provide this money? Good. So now you're armed with information about what was supposed to be done. Great. What's the next thing you do? Write to NEPA. Ask them for the last report that they submitted to the minister on this project. What, Jeanette? Me can get the report that the minister get? Absolutely. The minister is your employee. And as soon as we have that mindset change, folks, your posture going to change, the conversations you have with them change, the way you tweet is going to change, and the way you get information is going to empower you. So I put that above all the many ones that I could discuss, because it's the skeleton and the frame and the spine on which we do all the work that we do now. Barbados has had an ATI legislation in draft since 2008. Somebody would say to me, but Jeanette, they're 65 out of 100, man. They're doing all right on the index. No. 65 out of 100 is better than where we are, which is 44 out of 100 in that corruption perception index. But nonetheless, there are citizens who have concerns, and they ought to have it. Well, Jamaica gave that to us 21 years ago. Our legislators did. And if I were to ask the 28 of us, well, minus Jeanette, the 27 of us here tonight, how many times have you had a question or a concern? And how many times did you draw for that? There's a big chance that 100% of us might say no. Usually I get 1 or 2 at the most in any group saying yes, they have. So that's one. That sets the stage for a lot. Press freedom, of all the development indices, I can't think of any other that Jamaica succeeds in more. We have gone as high as 6. Oh, that's amazing. You know, usually the Nordic countries, the Scandinavian countries, no, we are at number 6 and edging them out. We have fallen to 8. Won't get into that tonight, why? But that is still high. And if we were only at 10 or 12 out of all the countries in the world, that is impressive. We're wasting it. We're busy complaining that the journalists don't give us enough. We want investigative journalism. And I have to be honest with you, it bothers me every time, because I think of those journalists as Jamaicans, like all of us, doing a job, going out of their way. And for any citizen who is interested in change and advocacy or lobbying the government or anti-corruption or accountability activities, the media gives us enough. Could it be more? Yes. But what are we doing with what we call the little that they give us? I have been schooled on what happens in that paper, and not everything there is always correct. I can tell you that. So I've also learned to back check. But press freedom is crucial in Jamaica, that it allows our medium. I mean, the last time any journalist, God forbid, has ever lost his life in this country, good, we would have to look so much further back. So many jurisdictions, north and south of us, can't see that. Oversight agencies. We complain a lot about them, but again, if you check the Caribbean, the Contractor General, which morphed into the Integrity Commission, even an Auditor General, that is a creature of the Commonwealth. So yes, all the English-speaking countries in the Caribbean have it. Check their websites to see how are they performing. I had to speak to Antigua Observer the other day about a matter. And I decided in preparation for that radio interview to take a look at the Auditor General's website to see what are the kind of things beyond the issue that they were calling about. Folks, the last time they got a report was 2016. That would never happen in Jamaica. Every year, annually, before the 30th of December, which is what the Constitution, the FAA Act requires, that report is delivered. And several reports along the way. Have you ever taken a look? They're all written in the language that we can understand for the most part. But to what extent have we looked beyond what the newspaper has given us? JAMP was born out of a research by the coalition in 2016 where we looked at 6 years of Auditor General's reports. And I discovered that was one of the surprising things, that a lot of what I thought the media would have told us about, we didn't hear. So you have to take up those reports and look at it. Parliamentary oversight, I'll get into that, but the whole idea of a public accounts committee, which primarily takes the report of the Auditor General, reviews it with the Auditor General. The chairman decides which of the audits they would like to call in the technocrats about, drill them and have a hearing, determine what the problem is, make recommendations. Those recommendations are provided in an annual report back to the General Parliament. We'll get to that in a bit. But that PAC is one thing. All countries have it, but not all countries have a PAAC. What's the difference? Well, the Public Administration and Audit Committee of the Parliament looks at things happening now. The Public Accounts Committee looks in the rearview mirror. The Auditor General is always looking 1 year back, as auditors do, at what happened the last year, and sometimes maybe the year before. Your citizens say, well, what's the point of that? Things done gone bad already. No, the idea is we will find out what went wrong and we try and plug those holes so that it doesn't happen in the future. But as you can see from the headlines we looked at, that's not working so well, and we'll get to that. So that's the PAC, looking backwards based on the Auditor General's reports. Now the PAAC, the government of Jamaica was smart enough to realize, folks, we can't just keep looking in the rearview mirror. We need to know what's happening now. The Prime Minister often talks about macro-critical programs and projects. And if those go wrong, it would be really serious. There would be a ripple effect throughout the economy, and probably the IMF would be back here. So there are members of Parliament that are required to call in the agencies, departments, and the ministries who are dealing with massive projects and make sure that the oversight is in the now, so they catch things before they become a problem later for the Auditor General. Now, the PAAC is not a creature of the entire Commonwealth, and that is something that we should take note of. Now, let me just quickly say, because it jumped in my mind, in a lot of the Caribbean countries, you don't get a chance to see the live coverage of sittings of, say, the PAC and the PAAC, only the General Parliament. Not in Jamaica. The Ministry of Education, I think in about 2017, began to give more funding to PBCJ. And what do we have? Just about every committee meeting now. That is important. That is transparency. And there are a lot of other citizens who would like what we have, but I think we take that for granted, or we don't use it at all. Development partners. JAMP does what JAMP does, and so many other civil society groups, because we have external financial development agencies who are willing to say, all right, guys, we like what you're doing. We're willing to support Jamaica, Environment Trust, JAMP, NEA, CVC, you name them, all the different ones. This is key. Because if we sometimes take money from government, in as much as we want to partner with them, that can be problematic. The corporate sector is not always in a position or willing. So it's very important that we have development partners in the mix. Now the technology is just off the chain. I tell folks all the time that, goodness gracious me, none of our national heroes, and I don't even have to go that far back. My grandfather was a contractor, built a lot of the roads in St. Mary. And if he was having a problem, his capacity to access who we would call the accountable officers, it was practically nil. Today, with this, the power of digital technology, there's a new term called digital advocacy. I can actually reach my Prime Minister right now and tell him that, look, we're discussing this. Would you like to come on? And he may or he may not answer. his communications team may not answer. Some things get relayed to him, not all things, but what an opportunity that is. There was a conversation about, and it's still ongoing, about the extent to which the public purse did or did not fund the campaign for Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith. 2 weeks ago, before it kind of, became elevated to the point that it is, I put a post of Jam's new animated video. So we do a couple of animated videos that explain governance, and I'd be happy to share a couple of them with you tonight. So we had just finished one about the access to information legislation, explaining to citizens what it is and how it works. And I thought this would be a good time to put it out there, because there's this question that the Gleaner has been trying to get information, citizens have been. So I put it out there and I tagged the Minister of Information. Oh, by 11 o'clock, the Minister of Information, after a very robust discussion, and that's a very nice way to put it, but he was on nationwide by 11 o'clock that morning, providing a lot of information that we weren't getting on social media. But there is no question in my mind that our post triggered that discussion, that triggered his decision to then go to the media, and ended up providing quite a bit of what we could not get in the last, say, months that folks had been trying. That's the power, guys, of social media, and that's the power of digital advocacy, the access that it gives us. And last but by no means least, we have young people, and I keep saying that they are nowhere as patient as we are. they have dreams, they are hungry, and they are not prepared to wait. And I think that there's a way in which we can channel that, providing them with this kind of information and empowering them, and watch them run in a way in which we have been a little bit more prepared to wait on the government and give them some time. And that's something JAMP would like to harness. And so for everyone here who's a part of a youth group or a church group, please, I would really appreciate the opportunity to come and to talk to them. And you might be a little bit surprised with what my last ingredient is. I've been paying attention for a while. I've been considering advocacy 8 years before I got involved, because sometimes, and I'm always aware of that with citizens, there are Jeanettes out there. They're ruminating, they're reflecting, and they're wondering what can they do, but they haven't been given the tools or the knowledge. And I had been doing that for 8 years, and I've been watching while I was in government after I left. And what I have discovered, and I'm really open to you disagreeing with me, is that whenever the Jamaicans really lean in and are serious, and we don't need no whole heap of numbers, it always shocks me the extent to which I have seen our policymakers pivot, shift, once they recognize that these guys are serious. And as I said in the beginning, they might and they are at times very irresponsible. But if it is that it takes us leaning in, that's the democracy. But the question is, are we doing that? And if that is what is necessary for that change to come, and so many other things we're interested in, then guys, make we lean in some more, no, man. That is really the basis for why I have made the decision that I made. Now, quickly for accountability, if we're diving into that, it's simple. It's an obligation. It's an obligation. It's an obligation to explain, justify, and take responsibility for your actions. Now, I've divided it into two because that's what the theory said. There's a calling to account and there's a holding to account. Now, Jamaica really doesn't do badly at all with a calling to account. Where, why, what has happened? We have MOCA, FID, Auditor General, all kind of reports. If you are interested, the government not going to come and give it to you guys, which is what we recognize, but they are there. So what JAMP does is we pull on that data, we put it on our website, we make these things accessible. So calling to account, fairly good. It's the holding to account that we are next to practically bottom zero on. That's where the focus is. Now, just to be clear, despite my definition, it doesn't get much better than this. This is the Cabinet Office's definition for it. It's an opportunity. Look at that. It's an opportunity to improve behavior, productivity, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. And again, it's an opportunity to link individual, institutional, and public performance to what? Working in our what? The public's interest. It doesn't get any better than that. Now, who's going to deliver that for us? These two. Outside of us, these two. I worked in government for a long time and I did not understand that these are not synonymous. And I say it all the time. I'm very open about it. I've learned a lot since taking JAMP on. So I would use these words interchangeably and they are not. Now, between these two, we rely on them for all of this. If you think about the public services you have used in the last week or the last day, it's amazing. As a matter of fact, you and I couldn't be here talking if they did not get things more right than they get them wrong. Now, let me just quickly raise to the functions of Parliament, because this is what's important. Number 3, overseeing the work of government. They represent the electorate. That's a huge hell of a statement. They pass laws for order, justice, reducing conflict between us, but very importantly for accountability. The Parliament of Jamaica provides the oversight and the monitoring of government. Goodness gracious, that is probably the most key thing to understand. And when you understand that, then the Parliament of Jamaica and the work that they do becomes sumamente importante. Yeah. Now, I lived too long before I learned that one of the laws that have to be passed every year, which we call the budget, is legislation. The Appropriations Act is the budget. Love to tell folks that, because the first thing they said to me is, so Jeanette, if them overspend money, we can send them go to jail. Hilarious, but something for us to explore. If the budget is legislation and it clearly sets out what is supposed to be spent on what project, it's a very legitimate question to ask. What comes of it when persons, and they do, according to the Auditor General's report, break this with impunity just about every year? The budget cycle becomes the most important thing we need to understand for accountability. Because no matter what it is your sectoral interest, whether it is housing, whether it is gender, whether it is the environment, every policy decision, every program is backed by a dollar. And so this year, we're all the way up to almost $1 trillion. Now, I'm just going to quickly remind us that this cycle is all of what accountability is about. The question for us is, to what extent are there entry points for the citizen? Because remember, I am the employer. And therefore, government really ought to have some mechanisms in place for the employers who want to ask a question, who not only needs to get an answer, but actually wants to participate in the decision making. If you stop and think about it, which employer gets barred by employees in the decision making process? Now, I'm going to ask you quickly as I go through this budget cycle, where do you fit in, or where do you see an opportunity for us to engage? It's really nice sometimes to look at the slide and see, I'm usually not very gender sensitive, but it always strikes me that there are these 3 women in a very significant position in this process. But we start with the Financial Secretary, Darlene Morrison. Every year, the government says, what are the challenges facing Jamaica? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? For example, COVID. We had to pivot financially because that was a challenge. And everything began with the Ministry of Finance making certain provisions. So they look at that every year, ministries, departments, and agencies for all the different sectors, and say, all right, this is what the people of Jamaica need this year. We have a discussion, we call it a debate. That's a whole other story, it's not. But that is something we should debate, whether or not it should be a real debate. We move into the Parliament where our elected representatives have an opportunity to ask the government to make some changes. Few concessions are made, but by and large, the decision is that of just about 20 people. That $912 billion. Just about the ministers in the cabinet get to decide. Now, guys, there are 28 of us here. Just stop and think about it for a minute. There are 28 of us. Can you imagine the power, the control, the influence that it gives you, all of us here, if we were told, just all of us here, that there's $912 billion and the decisions as to where those funds flow is up to you and I. If you think about it, you would almost want to empathize with the pressure that comes upon public officials. I was one. I can share with you guys the fact that I didn't have to approach the private sector. They come at you. I can share with you the stories that were of, potential illicit enrichment that were presented to me time to time by developers. I'll pause and share one. The first one that happened to me, I was coming from a site in St. Mary, and I started this way and I was coming around and making a U, and a developer called and said, Ms. Calder, I'm on site in St. Catherine, can you stop? And I said, yeah, great, actually I'm on the road and I'll do that. When I got to the site, and I just want to share this video just to show you how it works. When I got to the site, he asked my staff to leave and reassured them that he would take me to Kingston. No problem, no big deal. Toured the site, got an update. Things was kind of weird. I didn't quite get a sense that this is why I was there, and I asked him, is it? No big chat. We get in the car, we're driving. I still don't understand why I was on that site. And on our way back into Kingston, right about Ferry, the gentleman offers me a lot. Now, this was service lot development. And it took me a couple seconds to really understand what it is that he was offering me. And naturally, I refused. And the conversation moved to that too. Why, Miss Calder, me can't left you out. You know how me could have never get far upon this development without you. No, man, I disrespect you, I disrespect me, man. I tried to explain, and him said, no, man, I 5 lot me put on, you know. And he went on to list out the 4 other agents of government, not the persons, but the agencies of government that he had put down another 4 lots for. And he made me know, but this is how it is, I mean, I disrespect him. So I was nice as I could be about it, and the conversation moved from a lot. And then he said, you drive, don't it, Miss Collins? And I said, yeah. He said, what about 4-car tire? You need 4-car tire? I was like, no. Then it moved from 4-car tires down to a Rolex. And I eventually said to the gentleman, look, it's almost Christmas. I imagine you're going to have a party. Why you don't just invite me to the party and we can drink and have a juice? And that was it. And that was the beginning of several offers to come. So the point I'm making is, when the Prime Minister steps into that office, there is a current that is waiting to suck him in and pull him in, because of this 912, 167 billion last year, for example, the Integrity Commission tells us, was directed towards contracting. And a lot of public sector parties are vying for that. But even outside of that 167, there's a whole lot left over. And this is where we have an opportunity for what we call purchasing public policy. What do I mean by that? This is an example, folks. I'm not saying this happened at all. But 2 years ago, Capri, and they always used to do before COVID, a wonderful breakdown of the budget in a public town hall meeting. And I went to the last one in the Knutsford, and I remember I remember Capri, Dr. King, saying there was a 26% rise in funding for JDF and the National Ministry of National Security. And there was a 1% increase in social programs. Now, for those of us who understand how crime works and we think it's a social problem, we might want to see more going towards social programs. But if you think about it for a minute, guys, national security is one area that we do not have as much transparency, and it's understood across the planet for obvious reasons. So whenever procurement increases there, and I'm being extremely plain, it increases the opportunity for mischief. That's just a statement of fact. In addition to that, and I'm really genuinely not casting any words on the current discussion on SOEs, but I'm just trying to demonstrate how I sometimes sympathize with the pressure that public officials come under. Because, for example, catering services, you would never imagine it, but having read maybe every single solitary Auditor General's report since 2010, you would be surprised. But catering services is one of those contracts that the Auditor General always has a difficulty getting, and there are few things that woman can't get. Security contracts are another. And so if you think about it, in the SOEs, there are quite a number of contracts that have to be signed for catering, because food have to go out to the soldiers and the police, which is not something we would typically do. Now, I'm saying that this is a case where the purchasing of public policy can happen in countries. So you see that increase in an area where there's not much transparency. And that is one way in which, when I say every Monday morning, I try and remember to pray for the cabinet, because that's when they sit and discuss. It's a really serious thing. So I ran ahead of myself, but this is a very important slide just to give you guys a picture of the entire cycle of accountability. The money then goes, once the Parliament has completed that debate, and the Accountant General, the spending begins, the borrowing begins, the taxation begins, but then the other and the final is the Auditor General, which is oversight. Now, of all of those 4 areas, can anybody tell me where the citizen has an opportunity to get involved in what our employees are doing, basically? Anybody has any idea where there is any opportunity in those 4 stages in the budget cycle?
In everyone?
For the citizen to engage. I don't know who answered, but could you give me an idea as to what it is you're thinking of? How do you see us engaging?
I'm thinking that at every stage of that cycle, there's an opportunity for us, whatever the mechanism is.
I like that word. I like that word. The truth is, in budget formulation, there is no mechanism for the citizen to engage. That is entirely citizens who are hired by the government, yes, but not you and I. Naturally, for the parliamentary section, there is none. There can be. I really believe, and I said it to the Minister of Finance in a town hall meeting last year, that I think listening to his lectures, his speeches, I learn a lot. But I wanted to ask him, why is it at budget time we don't have our members of parliament sitting in the constituency talking to their constituents about the budget and give them an opportunity for an input, which our representatives can then represent in the parliament, but that doesn't happen. Can it be done? Yes. Is it being done? No. So we move to number 3. And yes, we are participating there because the mechanism is taxation. Most of it direct. And that is the extent to which we get to participate. 4, however, is the easiest place for us to, which is the oversight. And that, for example, is what JAMP is doing and any citizen actually can do. So we really wanted to look a little more closely on number 4, but let me say this much to you. There are countries in the world who recognize that their citizens are the employers and have actually put some fascinating mechanisms in place. And a quick one is South Africa. South Africa has put a certain percentage of the budget down, and I think it's 3%, but 3% of South Africa's budget is huge. And they have put a mechanism in place to allow the citizens to indicate to the government where they would like to prioritize. I think it's fascinating. I think it's a lovely entry into the process, and that's something JAMP would like to lobby for in terms of what we call participatory budgeting. But up to this point in time, it's really number 4. Now, I think the last slide that I really want us to focus on, well, 2 last slides that I want to focus on is this one. It looks really just like a photo, and it is a photo of the parliament. But the entire story of accountability can really be told here. And so I want to use it demonstratively because parliament is the seat of accountability. When things go wrong, we really do tend to look to the government, but it actually begins and ends in the parliament. And so that's where we have our focus. And that is why we have a legislative tracker that tries to demystify the parliament, because my goodness, this thing used to be boring. I remember my father at 14 sitting me down and telling me to watch, and I never made it past 15 minutes. The only reason it has become so fascinating is because I actually now begin to understand what's happening in the space. Now, I'm going to say some things that's obvious, but I'm hoping I'm going to say some things that's not so obvious about this photo. Now, who am I identifying there with that, yellow transparency? Can anyone tell me who those are collectively?
The ministers of all the line ministries.
Perfect. That is the cabinet. It's a very interesting word coming from the Commonwealth. They call them the front benchers because they're really sitting at the front. But that is the cabinet of Jamaica. They are what you would call the chief accountable and accounting to some degree if you hold the permanent secretary from our side. But what has become fascinating for me in understanding accountability is that these are the members of parliament that we call the opposition. An unfortunate term when we really understand the job that they are supposed to do. But it became clearer to me while doing this job that it is the job, while it is these relatively 1920 Jamaicans who get to make a decision about where resources go, when and how. And it is the job, we think, of these Jamaicans to provide oversight. It really was fascinating for me to learn that it is the job of every member of parliament who doesn't sit in the cabinet that is supposed to hold these gentlefolks to account. That's not what I see happening in the House. So when folks tell us that the Constitution of Jamaica doesn't recognize a political party, and therefore the parliament doesn't, you will never hear a reference to a party. You will only hear the reference to the member, and it will state which constituency they represent, because the Constitution merely called the citizens to apply for this job. Citizens got together and say, listen, if we kind of got together and come up with one idea, put it in a book and say, this is our manifesto, chances are, we will all win, and that is how a political party, in a sense, get formed. But as long as they're entering that space, there is not any such thing. There's the government, and there are the other members of parliament that are supposed to hold the government to account. Yeah, fascinating. But we do see examples of it, and the most recent one, and she is to be applauded for it, was back in October, when the member for East Rural St. Andrew, who was really displeased with the performance of the then minister, the Minister of Health at the time, stood in the parliament and chided him and upbraided him for her displeasure because she wasn't able to deliver the information that she needed to her constituents the way she would want to. Now, that is an unusual thing to see, but that is the job of Mrs. Holness. She's not there as a member of the Jamaica Labour Party. She is there to oversee every decision that is made here and to question it and to drill in. And the Parliament has several mechanisms for accountability. And the more we understand them, is the more we understand when our parliamentarians are not holding the government to account. And it's also, the more we understand it, is the more we understand how we can participate in it. And I'll just give you two quick examples. One is question time. Let me give you an example of this. This was last year, October. Many of us were concerned about the Jamaica College situation. At that time in October, unfortunately, Minister Ruel Reid had already stepped down, but he was still already working for the JC, and the principal's office was never yet ever made available to the acting principal. And it was like, what? Everybody wanted to know what's going on. Now, the shadow minister, at least Minister MP Robinson rather, took advantage of a mechanism in the House called question time. That's a pretty obvious, name for it. But it is the right of every parliamentarian, except those in the cabinet, to ask the cabinet members to give account of a matter that they need information on. Within 3 weeks, typically 21 days, the standing orders say a response is usually provided. Now, how many citizens here, or any citizens you can think of, who are aware of that mechanism, have ever taken advantage of it? We had these questions. Did we ever think of getting in touch with our member of parliament and saying, MP, I know about this question time. I know the parliament allows you to ask some questions. Here are 2 questions I want you to ask on this for me. The parliamentarians don't tell us this, but if they are your representative representing the views, then that is obviously a channel we can work. And I say obviously, but it's not so obvious. But that is one mechanism that exists in the House. But basically, we kind of wait on the shadow cabinet to ask the questions, but there's nothing stopping citizens from providing these questions and being present and waiting it out until the answers come back and then engaging your MP about the matter. That's one. The second one, commissions of parliament. We don't see that very often, but we have minister statements. Every single Tuesday, the cabinet members have to get up and provide a report and an update on what is happening, allowing the other MPs, all of them in the blue here, to ask questions. We don't expect it of the cabinet because the cabinet is, one unit known to have collective responsibility. Whatever one decides, it's really everybody owning it. But that was fascinating for me to learn. And there are another 3 accountability mechanisms, which I can't go into tonight. Happy to come back and discuss them. But I hope you're getting a little bit of an insight into, if we know these things, how we can take advantage of them and get our MPs to really do the job that they're there to do. Holding government account for the quality of public goods and services and the utilization of that 912 billion, which we provide. The media is there, a very important other aspect. You and I are at work every day, so somebody has to come and tell me what has happened in the House. The media is there, and of course, I don't know how many of us have gone. I know I've seen a couple of them in the chat there, but citizens in the gallery. COVID, we haven't been able to go, but PBCJ is there. How many of us tune in? They upload them every day. How much of them are there? Now, my final slide for the night just will give you one of the key gaps in accountability that I humbly submit is the reason why we keep seeing all of these headlines. Now, there are several, but I want to identify for us what I think is the key reason that from 1958 until now, perhaps, we have been having this problem. And if we understand this, JAMP has started a bit of advocacy to see some change, and we certainly would like your support. So very quickly, the budget oversight, because accountability, as I said, no matter if it's not money, no matter which sector, money is backing every policy decision and everything that government has to do. So the budget oversight process is really the key, if you understand that, to accountability. Now, as quickly as I can, it starts with a permanent secretary. When I was in government, the permanent secretary couldn't fire, the permanent secretary couldn't hire. That has changed. Government has made a really good decision, and they called it let managers manage. If they are the accountable officers, then how can you tie their hands in that way? So permanent secretaries have now been given the authority, what they call it the delegated authority, which is vested only in the Governor General. It's the Governor General who hires, the Governor General who fires. A Public Services Commission used to do it on their behalf. Now it has been delegated to the permanent secretaries. And there are at least 7 different kinds of sanctions that they can apply. As to whether or not they're doing it, that's another story. So it starts with the permanent secretary and the internal auditor, who is constantly supposed to be checking what the Auditor General checks for, which is compliance with the laws and ensure that the financial statements are accurate. And that is in essence what they're doing. Now, that doesn't happen. A financial secretary shared with me that they don't get enough pay, and so we don't get quality. My answer to that is we waste so much money, we lose so much money. Might as well we pay them as much as we can and we get competent people, because that's a win-win at the end of the day. Now, the permanent secretary and the internal auditor provides information to the Auditor General, who is empowered by law. Anything she asks for, she has to get, and usually she does. Her work, however, is supported by several other oversight agencies, which I mentioned. We can't go into the differences tonight, but it's very important to also know how each of these work. The more we know, guys, is the better we can advocate, and it's the easier that we can engage our public officials. But that's hopefully another presentation. The Auditor General's report goes straight to the Parliament. It is to be passed on directly, as we shared before, to the Public Accounts Committee. The Public Accounts Committee is also supported in their work somewhat by the PAAC. If they do their job well as well, there should be less going to the PAC. We talked about that earlier. Now, the report of the PAC at the end of the year, they literally do faithfully every year. It's a bipartisan committee, provides the Parliament with a report. Now, remember, these reports go to all members, but it's not effective for every member to sit down and go through the Auditor General's report. That's why we have what we could almost call a subcommittee, the PAC. But at the end of the year, they report back all the things that we have seen in the newspaper, their recommendations, and what it is that government has to do now to fix it so it doesn't happen again. And that's the key. That after that debate in the House on that annual report, those recommendations and decisions of the Parliament, our elected representatives, are passed down to the Cabinet. If the issue is one pertaining to sports, then the Minister of Sport responsibility for that portfolio. Then, based on what the Cabinet has decided to do, whether it's budgetary support or whatever, the Minister in responsibility passes that on to the Permanent Secretary, and the PS, who I just shared with you, is empowered, is allowed now to do what? Either sanction, fines, dismissal, all manner, as I said, 5 different things they can do, as well as that Permanent Secretary is in a position to refer the matter to the Integrity Commission and any of the others listed there who actually have now what we call prosecutorial power. That's what is supposed to happen. And what JAMP has discovered as a significant bugbearer is a simple little gap that, however, the weakest chain, even though it's a strong chain, the weakest link rather. This is what we have discovered, folks, and this is where I'm going to end tonight. There's a whole lot more to be said, but in the interest of time, I just wanted to give you a window. What is happening here is that we have gone back at least 16 years, and I'm pretty convinced that if we maybe went back another 5, every year that those annual reports are provided by the members of Parliament that sit on the PAC or the PAAC, they are faithfully tabled. These are not big reports. I don't think they pass 12 pages. Though they have been tabled, they have never made it to the agenda of the Parliament for discussion. And so if you don't get that discussion taking place, there is a hamstringing of that accountability chain. What happens is if the media reports on something and the people get upset and they call the call-in show and they write a couple articles to the paper, or politicians or what, they're responsive, they respond. And so the Cabinet jump start to do something about it. But this roadblock, and if you just think about it in the context of, I like to use Grace Kennedy, making food, have to dump about $25 million worth of cans of food because the air quality was off and it has to be so fine-tuned. You can bet your bottom dollar that somebody's going to have to provide a report to the board, to that CEO, to that chairman. And I cannot think of any company in Jamaica who is doing well where that matter comes to the board and the chairman rather puts it down for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, not putting it on the agenda for discussion so that a decision can be taken whether to fire the person in charge, to retrain the person, or to fix some mechanical problem that they had. So what you and I have had for 16 years, multiplied at about 40, because it's about 40 times per year they sit, of opportunities to discuss these matters that relate to the losses of billions of dollars. And it really shook me to the core to learn that this, as important as it is, has not made it to the agenda of the House in as long as that. So folks, there is so much to get into for the 101. The policy framework is in place. several well-done documents by consultants. The institutional framework is in place. All of these institutions that you see here and more that I haven't mentioned. Have you ever heard about the Public Accountability Inspectorate of the Ministry of Finance? No, maybe not. You must have heard about the Financial Investigation Division, that's there. But have you ever heard about the PED, the Public Expenditure Division of the Ministry of Finance? There are so many. There's legislation to back each and every one of them. And I haven't gotten an opportunity because of time to get into it, but I would love to unpack for you the legislation, but also most importantly, the sanctions that are available. You and I, when things go wrong, would think that the ministers are the only person that have the power because that's who the media call and that's who the people call for. But the cabinet has the least amount of teeth if you want to get serious about accountability. The cabinet can only fire the board in an agency and recommend a matter to be investigated. But if you're talking about real sanctioning power, there are 9 other public officials with real teeth. And I would love to come back and explain to you what those real sanctions are and how they are supposed to work with all of those horrific stories that we hear all the time. Institutional power is in place, policies in place, legislative power is in place. What is missing? The answer to that is really the citizen, plain and simple. I alluded to that in the beginning, and that is really the truth. At the end of the day, the buck stops here with you and I. We are the owners. We have provided employees who are the stewards. But like any organization that everybody in here represents, you understand that the oversight is necessary, but not only the oversight. Have you ever tried to oversee a department you don't understand? It's hard. Or oversee an employee or a consultant whose job you really don't understand? It's hard. So this call tonight is really to say to you guys, this is just an appetizer for what I'd like to share with the team here, what I'd like to share with Jamaica Coalition for Healthy Society. I would like to come back to digging a little deeper into the nuts and bolts, because the more you understand is the more confident you're going to be about engaging, and is the more confident you're going to be in the canteen, at the water cooler, when these issues come up and you look in the paper. You can have a whole different conversation if you know how this thing works. So I am more than willing to take some questions now, but I'm saying to the team, this is just an overview of the 101 of combating corruption, but successive governments over time have really done a good job of putting all the ingredients in place. What is needed is citizens in the ring. And last analogy is, I always talk about the microphone that's allowing you to hear me or allowing you to see me because I've attached a webcam. If the webcam is not properly inserted into that USB port, I will be sitting here cussing China about the poor quality control when there's really nothing wrong with the webcam and there's nothing wrong with the laptop. All it is that for both of them to work and for you to see me and hear me, the cable has to be properly inserted and connected into the laptop in order for the democracy to work. It could very well be that that analogy is perfect. There's nothing wrong with the system and the policies and legislation. They're not perfect. But the problem, guys, is that if we have disengaged, we can't be on the outside looking at politics and saying, boy, dirty and it nasty, if it has been designed for the citizen to engage, and it has been. So the more of us engage and the more of us understand is the more the democracy going to work, and is the more we will be able to combat corruption. The more we pull away from it and say dirty and it nasty is the more the opportunity that we create for it to continue. So thank you very much tonight, and I'm going to hand back over to your moderator in case there are any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Teacher Calder. Top marks to you.
That's a new title now, eh?
No, but really, this has been an excellent module 101 in
Oh, I'm happy to hear
tremendous knowledge download, and just really want to thank you for demystifying the citizens' response to corruption. And as you said, it's human nature. We're dealing with human nature, remove the politics and other labels that would hinder us or cause unnecessary fear in terms of engaging. And you really have reoriented our mindset. We are the employers.
Absolutely.
And so just that worldview change really gives us
a huge difference.
Courage and determination. But wait a minute, it's my money and I employ them. So we have to
Absolutely.
hold them to account. And it's just fascinating that there are so many levels of inherent controls that already exist. So I can see your platform of hope because there are things that we can do. They've already been established. We just need to plug that cable into the USB port. But again, you know, the pullback and the lack of engagement again is a human nature thing.
That is true too. That is true
So
too.
the
That is
people
true.
need to
That is
act.
true.
But really, really grateful for this. We have to lean in. We can lean in. So participants on this Zoom call, please put your questions into the chat. Now is your opportunity to dig in, lean in, and gain more from this experience that Jeanette has had and how she has packaged it lovely for us, and the tools that exist through JAMP to hold our government accountable. I'm going to give chairman's privilege. Please, Dr. West, you go first.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I think it's an excellent talk, quite an eye-opening talk, and she concluded exactly the question I was going to ask. Where is the problem? The problem is the citizens, the citizens, the citizens. And how do you see the possibility of mobilizing citizens because the citizens naturally expect the government to take care of them and to take care of all the problems. What are your thoughts about mobilizing the citizens?
Well, the first thing, Doc, is that I have this goal in my head that makes it more manageable. When I've looked at the times when I've seen government pivot in response to citizens, and I've said that it has never really needed thousands, I have concluded that if we can aim at one, less than one, but I'll aim for 1% of the population engaged, that's what, less than 30,000 people. I think that's more than enough. How do we reach them? Exactly what we're doing now. I think in the traditional way, sometimes getting off Zoom, getting into the youth programs at church, 4-H clubs, Kiwanis, you name it. When Philippa said a while ago that the citizens engaging or not engaging is also a human nature issue, I always use myself as a guinea pig. I was out of the ring for 8 years, though I was interested, but not knowing what to do. It was information that made the difference, but also, very importantly, having the opportunity to see other citizens engaging. Cowardice and courage are both very contagious things. If you take a look at it, when one citizen sees another one step forward, and nobody knows this more than the church, you know, the pastor is preaching and he's giving that altar call and nobody's moving for the first 5 minutes. But when somehow gives permission for the others to say, yeah, I can do this. And that is what happened for me. I had the information, I had to seek it, I had to be intentional about it, but there were citizens around me that I saw who were doing that and having some successes, and that pushed me forward. So I think the more of us engage, the more it will signal to other citizens. One of the things that I'd like to do is come back and share the successes that JAMP has had, engaging with government over things that we are tracking, and to see the way in which they pivot and turn and respond. The more we talk about that is the more it will encourage other citizens to use the ATI. First time citizens pick up that form, them afraid to put down them name. There's like, Lord have mercy, what are gonna happen to me? But JAMP demonstrating that, hey guys, we're doing this and getting a response, that's a part of the secret of the success, I think, as well. I hope that helps somewhat. So the information, them seeing others engaging, sharing the successes that we have, those I think are the key things that allowed me to come in, and I think would work for any other human being in the same way it worked for me.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Jeanette.
Doc.
So does the Parliament recognize that it has control over the cabinet? Did the backbenchers realize
That's a good
that
question.
role?
That is a really good question. I will commend the Prime Minister, because we learned in 2020, going into 2021, that he recognized, I think we had 20 new parliamentarians, several of which were relatively young. And he took the decision that he would, separate apart from more taxes, raise some funds to actually have them trained in parliamentary procedures, I think from McGill University in Canada. And I thought that was really commendable, because the truth of it is, Philippa, if we think about it, we've been promised a job description from 2015. That don't have no major public purse attached to getting that done. That is such a basic tool for accountability. And I'm not being dismissive of somebody who cashiers at the supermarket. But if you go and you ask them if they have a job description, you bet you they do. It helps them and it helps the person who has to oversee them. We don't have that as yet. So the parliamentarian coming in don't really have that either. And so what I think happens is that you kind of take your cues from the older ones. And if the older ones are accustomed to doing a certain thing, let me give you a quick example. JAMP is collecting all the constituency development reports from parliamentarians because there's a 20 million allocation to them. And we are adding those reports to our MP tracker. Each MP has a profile page on JAMP's website. So we're adding them so citizens can access it, see what is happening with the 20 million, also get some ideas from other constituencies, what they can do with it. And it's interesting that we have actually found it easier to get these reports from the older, elder statesmen, veterans in the House than trying to get that from the newer parliamentarians. This whole thing about is young people time now, they really have come in, they get a sense of entitlement, and I'm just saying it as it is for some of them. And I think they are, going off what they think is the power of the parliamentarian and what their job is. Quickly, I didn't get into it, but between September 20 and September 2021, JAMP asked for a list of all the reports that have been submitted to Parliament because all our public bodies and executive agencies and commissions have to report back to Parliament because they decided where the money must go, so they must get information back on how it's going. 294 reports, and not one of them read by our parliamentarians. 294 reports, and that is part of their job. So, Philippa, a young parliamentarian come in and sit them just on the desk, put down. I asked the question, when the commissions of Parliament, the 6 of them, report to the House, where do those reports go? The answer is they're unassigned. And I don't know how that lands on you, but that lands on me like, what? So who is steering the ship of accountability? So now we understand why those headlines happen. So the young ones come in, they see nothing happening with the reports. I think they simply pattern what they see the elders doing. So it's a mix of an answer. But I think the Prime Minister did the right thing in training, and we're sincerely hoping that we will see the fruit of that as we continue into the parliamentary term.
Right, right. Civics was a mandatory course in high school up until the early 80s. Do you think its removal accounts or is a factor in our apathy, citizen apathy or lack of engagement?
It's a good question. The answer and the easy answer is yes. When I started with JAMP, I went back to Sangsters and bought that book that I had gotten back in 3rd form, which was no longer a little red book, was now a big red book. But that is actually where I started back at the basics of 101 of civics. So even though I had the benefit of getting it, by now all of it gone, I had to refresh myself. But while I still say that is the case, that if it came back, it would be important. If there is not a context, I'm not so sure how much of a difference it would make, and I'll tell you why. I've had the opportunity to guest lecture a couple of times with different universities in Kingston. And these are students, for one, that are studying public financial management, not just governance, but looking at the area of PFM and accountability. And it was only when it was set in this context did it come across to them as something that they are to apply, and that this information is something that they're learning at the university in order to engage and advocate and hold government to account. What I found, Philippa, is that it was simply, nonetheless, an exam that needed to be set and information that they needed to get in order to get a degree. And this is feedback I got from the students themselves about how this kind of putting it into context of what really is happening kind of gave them that mindset shift that though they are studying it and at a very high level, the dots were not being connected. So going back to the civics is important, but this is why I think civil society and the kind of work that JAMP does is important, because there's a kind of connection that doesn't get made in academia. If it's even high school, going all the way up to the tertiary level, has to be really intentional. And I go back to the church creating the spaces for that intentionality, the service clubs creating the space for us to, not just us, but anybody who's willing to come in. I think that's what's going to have to happen, not just civics as a subject in a school. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Participants are expressing their commendations, excellent presentation, never thought that they were the boss, and they're proud of how you are representing the owners. You made a comment about us having a high ranking for press freedom.
Yeah.
But perhaps it's relative, huh? But
always.
Do we truly have press freedom at that highest level that's recognized?
Well, I have seen some articles. As a matter of fact, somebody called me right before I came on another conversation I'm going to have with the Quakers next weekend. And they were recommending an article to me that I hadn't seen, and the topic was just hard hitting. And I read it and I was like, wow. I read another piece done by Kay Osborne. We've been discussing the matter of the spend for the Secretary General's funding and the extent to which a job, which was, to our understanding, not a public job, but a job that would see the senator leaving Jamaica to go for the extent to which we should have spent so much. And I saw an article written by Kay Osborne, as hard-hitting as you can imagine. There are several countries in the world where that article would have had a lot of implications. Though you say it's relative, guys, I can't remember if it's roughly, usually these indices are about 140 countries being weighed. If Jamaica is in the top 10, as relative as that is excellent. The question is whether or not our media is utilizing it as much as they can. They can do more. My own personal response to that is never going to come from me. And I tell you why, folks, because I think of the journalist as me with family, want to go home. What is going to make that journalist stay a little longer for another hour or two or go a little further? It has to be that when they provide us with that information, and if you don't mind me saying this, we're not reading it for the first time when we're putting the newspaper down to mop up some water that has spilled. They need to understand that citizens are receiving that information and willing to act on it, and they will be motivated to go further. So I think that the media in Jamaica has given us more than what we need if we are serious about engagement. And when they see us investing in what they have done for us, then we will see us moving from 6 up to where we should be. But I think that's an excellent score to be at number 8. It's sorry that we fell. And if you don't mind me saying it, just so you understand how this works, it was a comment by the Prime Minister that the French Reporters Without Borders, I think, that does this measurement. When the Prime Minister came out and said to the people of Jamaica, I can't remember the exact words, but in essence, nobody go to the media. Come to my social media page, and went on to say things that were being a little Trump-like, which it was diminishing the importance of the media in the eyes of the public. Believe it or not, the chief policymaker in Jamaica signaling that in a democracy was considered a very serious thing. And in order to send a signal to Jamaica, they dropped our scores. And I appreciate that because that sends a very powerful message, and that ties into a whole heap of other things. And I believe that kind of will hopefully modify behavior. So it's as sensitive a measurement as that, folks. And I think whether we are 8, 10, or 6, kudos to the media, and kudos to the government of Jamaica and our parliament for creating the environment. Kudos to the business sector for creating the environment where they feel that they can speak without fear for their lives or fear for their jobs. And that's kudos to the country. Yeah.
Indeed. Just to remind participants, if you're new to the Issachar Foundation lecture series, do put your email address in the chat if you wish to be notified of upcoming lectures so we can add it to our mailing list. Another question for you, Jeanette. Do you think that the MPs help in perpetuating citizen apathy for their own protection? MPs present themselves as gift givers and school fee payers rather than accountable employees.
Yes. The answer to that is yes. There's been a long-standing debate at the board level. Seeing as we're now tracking the Constituency Development Fund, we have done a video on it explaining to citizens how can we get a piece of the pie of that 20 million. And in the course of doing that, there are some board members who actually feel that there is a legitimacy that we have extended, whereas they are very concerned about the fact that even with the Constituency Development Fund, there are still 26 government agencies that have to provide that service through the fund. And so their argument is, why? Why does it have to come through the MP deciding, most of the times by themselves where that money is to flow? If it is 26 government agencies and primarily 3 of them who will end up responding to that concern, why can't they just go through the state? Because when a citizen is assisted by the government or by the MP, there's a loyalty and a favor and a feeling beholden to them. That is not good. So that's an ongoing debate, and I'm sympathetic towards it. But my own personal view, Philippa, is this. It exists, and in order for it to not exist, we're going to have to get 63 parliamentarians, or at least the majority, to agree. And I don't see that happening in the near future. So JAM's position is, let us see how we can keep our eyes on it. There's an excellent CDF policy in place. It really is. I was really amazed when I read it. A simple little thing is that the CDF parliamentary committee that has to approve every project is not to approve a project unless the MP can indicate that they have consulted with their constituents. Hey, look at that. But if the citizens don't know that, who is going to hold them to account? The CDF parliamentary committee is not doing that. So what JAM's focusing on is there's an excellent policy. Let's share it. Let citizens understand it. And let us watch how that money is being run, because that's the best we can do. We're not going to get the MPs to agree that they will no longer be able to help citizens. And I shouldn't put it in quotes because it really does help citizens. But I agree that there is apathy contributed to the behavior of the MPs. They ought to be educating the constituents. A lot of what I'm doing here is what I would be excited to see a parliamentarian doing, but I don't. Do I put all of them in the same category? No, I don't. And I'll quickly just say, because I remember when the IMF was coming to Jamaica, I'm the president of my Citizens Association. Everybody in the community was panicking. The only thing we know about IMF is what happened in the 70s. And guess what? I said, why don't we call our MP and ask him to come and explain this? And the member of parliament came, and I'll never forget what he said at the end of that meeting. He says, I've been an MP for 35 years, and I've never had citizens call me to discuss policy. They call me for the drain, they call me for the street lights, they call me for the road, they call me for the garbage. And that, he says, is something they should do. But this was an MP, and I'll tell you, it was Delaware Chuck, and he said, it's 35 years. I would come, but it's the first time. So what does that tell you? There are MPs who will respond if citizens are not apathetic. Are we taking advantage of those? Let's work with the ones who will, and watch the ones who won't get a little jealous of what is happening and join those. Yeah.
It's as if we're staring at each other. You know, you have the power to do it, you have the power, but we're not exercising. You have it, but you're not exercising it.
Absolutely.
Question
Absolutely.
here, you were mentioning about training new parliamentarians. Is it a structure, or is it ad hoc? Is it something fixed, a schedule that is part of their orientation?
Wonderful. My understanding, the clerk of the House has indicated that every new parliamentary term, not year, term, which is when, you know, after 4 or 5 years, there is a structured curriculum. She has shared with me, however, that the attendance is pretty poor. And as I get it, so I give it. I can answer because the same question that you received, I was curious about it, and I've asked her, and that's what we get. So she says, not enough attend, and that bears itself out. You know, she says, and she didn't quite finish the sentence, but I understand what she's saying. However, we have seen the Integrity Commission since it has been operationalized, and kudos to the government. There is nothing the Integrity Commission has asked for in terms of resources that they haven't gotten. And part of what they are now doing, specifically related to corruption, is that, and I've seen the curriculum, it's a very impressive training they have done of the cabinet. They have now moved on to the parliament. I would love to see them include civil society, because I think I would benefit from that. So that's another level of training directly related to not parliamentary procedures, but the fight against corruption. So kudos to the government and kudos to the Integrity Commission. The McGill training was something I believe that was limited to the Jamaica Labour Party MPs. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's the case. I think the new MPs for the PNP were just 1 and 2, but I would have liked to have seen everybody get training.
Right.
But I would still commend the Prime Minister for that, but that's as much as I can share. There's a curriculum the Parliament has. Oh, and by the way, folks, our taxpayers' money also from time to time, especially that COVID is gone, send our MPs to the UK, send our MPs to Canada. They have done at least 2 of such training visits. So there's also the government-sponsored training that sees them going physically to visit other parliaments to see how it works. And it's fascinating to hear from the MPs who have shared with me how their eyes open at what they learn and see happening vis-a-vis what happens here in Jamaica. So that's another level of training that I know happens as well. Yeah.
Thanks. Here's another question. How can one get estimates of expenditure in the budget at the granular level on a minister basis?
I love that question. I love that question because JAMP has 3 trackers now and we're coming out with another 3. So we'll have a suite of 6 tools. But, you know, guys, I was in government and I go look at the budget one day and I never last 5 minutes because, let me see. I mean, my God, this is it, you know? And I think it was budget time. I was still in government and I was participating in it, but I was participating in it like this and I wanted to see the big picture. And I went over to PIOJ because it was across the road and could not understand it. And so what JAMP has done is we've decided that which citizen is going to ask for that. By the way, it's very difficult for us to even get a copy of that. But you can go to the ministry's website. You will find that in PDF form. But guys, come on. How can we manipulate that? That's hard. So what JAMP has done, we're almost finished, is that we have digitized the budget. And if I can give you a practical example. So last year, some crazy teenagers on Facebook discussing the fact that the government had bought a massive army vehicle, a tanker. And they had some crazy ideas about whether or not the government was going to use this to round up the people who never get vaccinated. It was a fascinating conversation for me, but I wondered, what if the citizen could pick up this phone and put in the question or the search and simply get an answer as to whether or not that was a budgeted spend? What I mean by that is for the women on the call, we do a lot of impulsive buying. Men do it too, but we do it more. But government does impulsive buying as well. So I would like to see a situation, Philippa, where citizens can literally just pick up the phone and plug in that information and see whether or not it was an allocated spend. If it was not, then you come to JAMP's website, you find which is the cabinet minister, you just hit that button, you put it out in social media, you ask him the question. Can you imagine? That's a high level of accountability. So I am very pleased to say that what is in this document and what the Ministry of Finance has given us is far more granular. You will not find in that document how much did the government spend on envelopes. But in the Excel document that the government has given to us, which we have now converted into a visualization, data visualization tool, you can plug in envelopes, Philippa, and boom, immediately what comes up is $35 million. You can decide to say, wow, that's not a lot, but you could decide to say, what? And then what does that do? It immediately allows the citizen to start a conversation with government that they can't have now at that level of granularity. So it's coming. It should be launched in another 3 months. But unless citizens have access to that level of spending, then the conversation can't change on where our money is going. So I'm really proud to be able to say that's coming soon.
Well, thank you, Jeanette. You're part of that inherent control by making it accessible and user-friendly.
Yeah.
So we put in the questions and to get answers. But then again, we need to then act. We need to
be able to act on it. Absolutely. And if I can just say, guys, that one of the things that's very important to us as JAMP is that as much as we embrace this role and this responsibility, because it does take some know-how, and we are standing in the gap as a civil society organization for other citizens. What JAMP doesn't want to become is a crutch, meaning that when something goes wrong, the last thing I want, which is what I hear now, is what JAMP there. What we want for the 1% that we're aiming at is that citizens feel empowered to act because we have provided the tools, but not pivot to say, we're JAMP there. It's a big difference. It's okay if we start off like that, but where we aim to get is to empower the citizen, not to become the crutch for the citizen to find out what is happening. Yes?
Right. So here's a question. We have all these great institutions. Why does it feel that we're not making real progress in reducing the perception of corruption or even improving scores from Transparency International?
All right, so that is the second module for the discussion, because what I shared with you today is really just for example, when we did the budget oversight journey and I showed you that little gap, which is really a big gap, that's one answer to the question, but there are more and it would be very difficult to answer it. I will say, however, that the perception hasn't changed because, and I know what I'm about to say here is, it's probably going to be a little controversial, but you know, I'm going to say it, guys, my honest opinion. And I said it on air on January 6th, so I should be able to say it here, is that there is no fight against corruption in Jamaica. Ugh, what a serious thing to say. And I'm not saying that as a reflection of what the public servants are doing. I am prepared to debate it with any parliamentarian in terms of what is supposed to happen in the parliament, which is the seat of accountability. I am prepared to say that there is no fight against corruption, and we cannot succeed if the parliament is not working in tandem with the government. So Auditor General has existed forever, but until the parliament, or just one quick thing, until we see the other agencies acting with the autonomy that they have been given, meaning they don't have to wait on no permanent secretary to call them in a Dempsey newspaper too. If they begin to work more in tandem, then things will change. That hasn't happened as yet, but my view is that behavior has changed, and I'll come back and share with you how we have seen behavior changing with just JAMP oversight. But if we had more citizens saying, we're MOCA, and understood how MOCA work, we're FID, when the pressure comes on, they will respond. When we lean in, government actually responds. So that's really my quick answer to that, but I'd be happy to come back and get into the midst of it.
So how then do we get them to attend meetings and read documents, turn up for the orientation program that's already scheduled at
All right.
Parliament? How we leaning on that then?
So we didn't get to that section where we share the tracker, but so for example, one of the most basic questions in accountability is the MP turning up on the job? Our members of Parliament are members of Parliament. I have been using as an example, and I call name because if you don't call name, you don't get accountability. I keep telling people you can't hold an issue to account. So attendance is not an issue. The issue is, for example, JAM's website, which has a MP profile page, starts off by monitoring the attendance of the MP in the general plenary sessions on Tuesday, but also as it relates to the key public financial management committees. So for example, and Andrew Wheatley, since he left the cabinet, has not been to Parliament more than 40 times for the year, 40% of the time for the year. Now, JAM does not aggregate that. It's the Parliament who collects that information. So the Parliament is signaling that they know this is important. There's even a standing order rule as to if you're absent too many times, what must happen. What JAMP is doing is bringing that information out of the darkness of the reservoir in the Parliament and making it easily accessible for you to see what your MP's performance is, so that you can have a conversation. Last but by no means least, Philippa, it's a small thing, but I'm kind of proud of it. In 2022, Jamaica, there is no website telling citizens who is them MP, where is the constituency office, what is the email, what is the phone number. The way most people discover that there is a JAMP website is because they're Googling for the MP and they come up on the website, because we have created a profile page that has that information. Where is the office? What is the phone number? Where is the email? Now imagine we have these employees. We pay $250,000 a month to each constituency office every month. That adds up to a lot for the year. But citizens don't know where the office is if they need the service. That's crazy. So I've lost my train of thought why I brought that up, but that's just to give you a basic idea as to where the accountability is. Where's the office? How can I find you? Right. So we provide that. We provide the attendance, we provide the constituency development reports, and we're continuing to build out those indicators around accountabilities for MP as time passes. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. A question on transparency of JAMP though. Who finances JAMP?
Wonderful. So I've been getting that question a lot lately. Our audited financials are on the website. We have had civil society organization, say how they have put that out there and the amount of problems it has created, because there are persons who are seeking to make mischief, and they can also make life very difficult for donors. There are donors who actually stop donating because of the unpleasant things that are said by virtue of the fact that you're helping a particular civil society organization. But by virtue of the work that JAMP does, we don't have no choice. We're fully supported. So the audited financials are there. We're completing the 2021 this week, so those will be added. In addition to that, JAMP was seeded. So before the European Union came into the picture in 2019, in 2018, the private sector, we had 8 companies in the private sector who said, yeah, this is a concept that sounds like it could make a difference. We're going to seed it. So we have the names and all the logos of all the organizations who contributed prior to the EU. So that's basically what's there. And if there are any more questions, we can certainly ask. I had a conversation with our auditor today because a citizen asked on social media that he wanted audited donations, not audited financials. My auditor has advised that there's no such thing as audited donations. But if a citizen came and wanted a breakdown as to exactly how much each donor has given, I'm openly saying that's a discussion I'm going to have with the board next week because I think that's where the questions have been going in the public space. But so far, everything is there in terms of who is giving us funds. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think this is our last question for this evening. The Integrity Commission has hauled junior doctors before the court for non-filing. How many MPs have been hauled before the court? Things like this lead to public cynicism.
Yeah. That is certainly one matter I would have gone to in depth. I just got an invitation this afternoon to present to the Parliament a submission that we made for recommendations for changes to the Integrity Commissions Act. And that is certainly one of the concerns we have mentioned. The last time I remembered anybody being penalized, it was MP Angela Brown. And I believe at the time, I'm seeing her, but I can't call her name. She's no longer in the Parliament. I do know that outside of the doctors, that MP, there was an MP whose name is escaping me now, who came out like about a month ago. The concern that I have for what happens to the doctors is very puzzling to me because I have several emails from the Integrity Commission explaining to me that they no longer provide reports like they have done from 1973. Telling us exactly the names of all the members of Parliament who have committed an offense for asset declaration. So if you go to JAM's website and you click on a member of Parliament and you go to the asset declaration, because we're tracking that, you can see from 2015 how many times any member of Parliament has committed an offense under the Act. Since 2020? No, since 2018, sorry, when the Integrity Commissions Act came into being, we have got no more information. And you guys have to understand that an offense can mean a crime. And if we have members of Parliament who have committed a crime that directly relates to abuse of public resources, that is something that there is a right to know test that we would be able to pass and say, no, the citizens should know. So for information that we used to have for 47 years, which is a detailed report from the government on who was late in submitting, who did not submit any at all, who is under investigation, and who has been placed before the DPP to determine whether or not they have committed a crime. We have no more access to that kind of information, Philippa, by law. So it was very surprising to me when I've been talking to Integrity Commission for 2 years about that, and then I saw all the reports that named the doctors. So that is a conversation that I am currently engaged with the Integrity Commission in because it's a striking anomaly to me that the parliamentarians are protected and have this veil of secrecy that is not afforded a public servant, and a public servant that was working so damn hard over the last 2 years that I could fully well understand why they might not have done that. So it's an ongoing discussion. The Joint Select Committee review begins on the 6th of July, that's next week, Wednesday, pertaining to the Integrity Commission. We'll be putting out a lot in social media and keeping everybody abreast. But yes, it is an anomaly in law that has to be corrected. It's an inequity that's built in that treats the parliamentarian different from the public servant. And that to me is just incredible. Has to change. Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Jeanette, for the expose on what is good, but what is also disgraceful, what needs work, but also, like you said, the hope that if we would only lean in, and I don't think it's just on this matter, it's really mobilizing the Jamaican public just to be involved and engaged in what's happening in their country. And yes, persons are just caught up with the day-to-day bread and butter issues, where's the energy left over to manage, but what we've got to, and if you say if we can find 30,000 or even half of that, 15,
half of that, Philippa.
We can.
Jamaica is unrecognizable in a short space of time, really and truly, guys. I'm not being optimistic. I'm really being realistic. And so I'd love to come back and finish the conversation because there's a lot more to dig into. Yeah.
Right. So thank you very much again for what you have done, what you've been called to do, and the passion and energy that you bring to it. God bless you. And for jampja.org, everyone, jampja.org, go and visit it and inform yourself. and tell others. And we will be back for part 2. Thank you so much, Jeanette.
Thank you. Thank you,
And
guys.
thank you everyone who has given their Wednesday
you,
afternoon
Sandy.
to us. We're so grateful. But just to give you a heads up that we will be having our next lecture coming hot on the heels of this one in light of the historic decision by the US Supreme Court last week, Friday.
Wow.
We're going to meet next week, Wednesday at 6:30 to look at Roe v. Wade, its impact and implications. So please put it in your diary next week, Wednesday, July 6th. Be here at 6:30 so we dissect that decision and its impact and implications. But thank you so much again, Jeanette.
I was rewatching the one you did on the Roe versus Wade in January today. So just to share with those who are left that it would be awesome to take a look at the one that you had in January that sets the stage probably for what's coming next week. It was really a great job. Thanks for that.
Thanks so much. Thanks for that plug as well. So again, I've gotten some email addresses of new persons. If you want to be on the mailing list and you're not there, put it into the chat and visit the YouTube channel, Issachar Foundation Jamaica, for those previous lectures. And we are looking forward to seeing you again. Everyone have a great evening. Stay well, stay safe, and God willing.
Everyone. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.